first deadliest disease we're going to talk about is called cholera. Cholera is an infection of the small intestine that's transmitted by drinking water or eating food that's been infected by an infected person. This food or water could contain feces that came from an infected person. 5 million people a year are affected by this disease, and over 100,000 die every year by being infected. Okay, so the second fact that we're going to look at today and the disease is smallpox. You may have heard of smallpox before. It's a pretty popular disease that was very big in history. Smallpox was actually quite rampant at one point. Smallpox is a serious illness caused by a virus called variola. Basically, smallpox are a cluster of blisters filled with pus all over your body. Kind of like chickenpox, but filled with pus and just everywhere. You don't want to see photos of it. Don't even look. It's terrifying. Smallpox killed a lot of people, predominantly children, in the 20th century. And then luckily in the 20th century there was a campaign for a vaccine to come out to help eradicate smallpox. And now there has been no known cases of smallpox since 1979. Smallpox killed many people. Before the vaccine came out, it's estimated that 500 million people died of this disease. The next disease we're looking at is called yellow fever. Yellow fever is a tropical disease that most often affects the liver and the kidneys. It causes fever and jaundice, and it's often fatal. Not something you want to get. Yellow fever, you can get it if you are bit by a female mosquito. Many female mosquitoes actually do carry the yellow fever disease. Here in North America, we don't see it as often. It's more prominent in Africa and in South America. Typical symptoms of yellow fever include aches and pains, fever, chills, anorexia, nausea, muscle pain, and headaches. Approximately 200,000 cases of yellow fever occur each year in the world, and 30,000 of those cases result in death. Okay, next up we have tuberculosis, otherwise known as TB. You may have heard of it before. It is a lung condition caused by bacteria called Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It's an airborne disease that is often successfully treated. Although in 2012, approximately 900 people lost their lives due to tuberculosis. Tuberculosis is one of the top causes of death for people with HIV because it attacks the immune system, and people with HIV already have a less strong immune system, and tuberculosis just like hits them and people die. Okay, so the next disease we're going to talk about is influenza. You may have heard of it before. Symptoms are fever, chills, aches and pains, puking, diarrhea. All around, they just don't make your body feel good. The flu bacteria is often transmitted through the air. You know, if someone sneezes, you could catch it by touching surfaces. If you don't wash your hands enough, you don't cover your mouth when you cough. Luckily, the flu can often be solved quite easily with drinking lots of water, keep rested, wash your hands, fill up on vitamin C as well. That helps. Many people that do die from the flu are often babies or older people. So the majority of us don't have anything to worry about, but you never know what can happen when you get a virus like that. Okay, fact number 6 is lung cancer. We've all heard of cancer. It's probably affected somebody you know, but studies show that actually lung cancer is one of the most common ways that people can die. Through women and men, lung cancer is accountable for 1.38 million deaths worldwide every year. Okay, the next disease we're going to look at is whooping cough. Whooping cough is usually occurring most in babies. You've probably heard of it. It's called the cough of 100 days. Basically, if your baby's coughing for months and months and they have a terrible whoop afterwards, that is whooping cough, and it occurs quite often. Okay, so the next disease is called the Ebola virus. You've probably heard of it recently in the news. It's something that we've all been terrified of. You know, if you travel, you see it in the airports, people check your temperature. You walk into a hospital, they ask you if you've been to some infected countries recently. Ebola virus is very serious. It is spread through the contact of infected body fluids. Victims of this disease usually suffer from muscle aches, weakness in the body, a lot of very typical flu symptoms actually. And in time, other symptoms will include bleeding internally and externally. Unfortunately, there is no known treatment of Ebola so far, so if you get it, the chances of you surviving are not very high. Okay, the next fact is the avian influenza, otherwise known as the bird flu. Yes, we can contract the bird flu as humans. The way most humans can contract this disease are by handling the dead birds who had the flu or touching fluids of the birds that have this flu. For this reason, many large outbreaks occur in agriculturally dense areas like sub-Saharan Africa with big agricultural practices and many parts of Asia. That's where we see the two biggest outbreaks of this flu, because people are handling birds all the time. The birds get the disease and they spread it to to humans. Okay, the next deadly disease is tetanus. You may or may not have heard of this one before. Tetanus is a medical condition and it's a bacterial disease. It is characterized by a prolonged contraction of muscle fibers. Basically, it's marked by the rigidity and spasms of muscles. It is contracted through wound contamination. This can include a wound, deep cut, and bacteria is getting in all those areas. You don't want that to happen, so clean up your wounds.
Halfway in at number 5, we have the Antonine Plague at 165 AD with a death toll of 5 million. Also known as the Plague of Galen, the Antonine Plague was a pandemic that affected Asia Minor, Egypt, Greece, and Italy, and it's thought to have been either smallpox or the measles, but the true cause of this is actually still unknown. They have no idea what this was. So this unknown disease was brought back to Rome by soldiers returning from Mesopotamia around 165 AD unknowingly, and they had spread this disease across the land, which decimated the Roman army. The Plague of Justinian comes in at number 4 between the years 541 and 542. It had a death toll of 25 million. Now this is said to possibly have eliminated half of the population of Europe at the time, and the Plague of Justinian was an outbreak of the bubonic plague, and the bubonic plague is caused by a bacterium named Yersinia pestis, and this afflicted the Byzantine Empire as well as parts of the Mediterranean, and at its height 5,000 people per day were losing their lives. Now, number 3, we have the flu pandemic. We've seen the flu on this list several times. This is on the year 1918 and had an estimated 20 million to 50 million people that lost their lives. So between the years 1918 and 1920, there was a destructive outbreak of the influenza that went global. Of the 500,000 people infected in the year 1918, the mortality rate was at 10% and it rose to 20%. What separated the 1918 flu pandemic from other influenza outbreaks though was that the victims themselves were different. It had started taking the lives of healthy young adults while leaving children and those with weaker immune systems completely fine. They weren't the ones passing away. HIV/AIDS comes in at number 2 with a death toll of 36 million, and I'm more so speaking of its peak in the year 2005 to 2012. Now, it was first identified in the Democratic Republic of Congo back in the year 1976, and currently there are between 31 and 35 million people living with AIDS right now, and the vast majority of those live in sub-Saharan Africa, where about 5% of the population is infected, and that's roughly 21 million people. Now, as awareness, of course, has grown a lot and new treatments have come out, so now HIV is a lot more manageable than it used to be, and many of those infected still go on to live very productive and prosperous lives. And finally, at number 1, we have the Black Death between the years 1346 and 1353. The death total was between 75 million and 200 million. So between these years of 1346 to 1353, there was an outbreak of this plague that completely ravaged Europe, Africa, and Asia. It was believed to be originated over in Asia though, and the plague most likely jumped continents through the fleas that were living on rats that were often found on merchant ships. So of course, ports were major urban centers at the time, so the bacterium among the rats and the fleas, they spread like wildfire.
There is a fear of beautiful women. This is probably caused due to low self-confidence or maybe too much pressure on people's appearances. It's called Venus Strephobia, and if you have this, you definitely aren't gonna go to a Vogue fashion show. Did you know that people can be afraid of people? But in reality, if you suffer this, you may have a fear of company. Perhaps hermits suffer from this, and it's a phobia called anthropophobia. But how about people that might be afraid of oneself? This one's called spectrophobia or isotophobia, and that's where you're afraid of your own reflection. Maybe they don't like to see themselves like this. And oddly enough, Pam Anderson, she suffers from this phobia. In today's society, we have 2 different types of attitude, and that is either I'm doing it my way or I want as many people to like me, so I'm gonna change myself. Now, although one repels and one attracts, both could theoretically suffer from sociophobia. This is because they're afraid of being judged by society. Now, with people becoming becoming more independent, and perhaps maybe I myself even suffer from this phobia. Stereophobia is when serious independently minded individuals become afraid of being dependent on others. You can rest assured there's a lot of I'll do it myself in those sort of relationships. Anthophobia, now here's an interesting one, because I always thought girls really love flowers, but it turns out girls who suffer from anthophobia are afraid of flowers. So definitely don't give them flowers on first dates, you might get a black eye. Now did you know that there are some people who can't look up at the sky at night or during certain parts of the day? This is because they're afraid of, boom, the moon. This beautiful celestial object may not be hurting us or going anywhere, but that's not what people with selenophobia think. Now people who suffer from papyrophobia must love the invention of emails and tablets. This is because those guys are afraid of paper. Who can blame them? Paper cuts suck. See what I mean? Now we live in a society where transgenders are fighting for equality, but there are people out there who are legitimately afraid of transgenders. People like to throw around the word transphobic a lot, but keep in mind, people who are actually transphobic can't help being it no more than anybody who's a transgender that can't help from being a transgender. Also, we also live in a society where everybody's opinionated. Look at the YouTube comments. But as we progress through this opinionated technological world, you may meet somebody who has allodophobia, and that is somebody who's deathly afraid of other people's opinion.
Nick Stoberl has the longest tongue, and it measures 10.1 centimeters, 3.97 inches from its tip all the way back to the middle of the closed top lip. Nick Stoberl's father was a huge fan of the band Kiss, and as a child, Nick would imitate Gene Simmons, and then he discovered for himself that his tongue was actually much longer than others. The next body part is the smallest waist, and the smallest waist belongs to Kathy Young, who was born in the year 1937. She's had her waist measured in two ways. The first way was with her corset on, and her waist measured 38.1 centimeters, which is 15 inches. And then her waist without the corset measures 53.34 centimeters. And the most surprising thing about this is that she's never had any surgery, nor does she eat any sort of special diet or exercise to maintain her waist. Next up, we have the longest nose. The longest nose currently on a living person measures 8.8 centimeters or 3.46 inches long. And this is measured from the bridge to the tip. The owner of the longest nose is Mehmet Özyorek from Turkey. Back in 2010, he appeared on TV, and that's when his nose was measured to be the longest. So, who has the largest feet in the world? Well, the current record for the largest feet is held by Jason Orlando Rodriguez Hernandez from the country of Venezuela. His feet measures 40.55 centimeters, which is 1.33 feet, and the other foot measures 40.47 centimeters, equal to 1.32 feet. And because of his mammoth-sized feet, he wears a US size 26. Are you ready to see the longest ear here? Well, this man, Victor Anthony from Madurai, India, has the longest hair coming out of his ears. His hair, when you measure it from the center of his outer ears, measures 18.1 centimeters or 7.12 inches. Before him was also a man from India by the name of Ranhakan Bajapai, who measured 13.2 centimeters or 5.19 inches.